Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and let's talk about everything that I read in the month of 2024. I returned to two of my favorite series, I think, that I could put those on the list, possibly. And I also had a DNF. It was an up and down month, but overall, very productive. And now that I'm thinking about it, actually, a reread, which is really, really rare for me as well. And I'm going to talk about it here. We're going to put it all into a nutshell. I'll talk about a couple things maybe that I'm looking forward to reading in July. But of course, today's also going to feature the Patreon pick of the month. We'll see what the raffler brings me for the month of July. But without any further ado, let's get into it. And I first want to talk about a series that I have returned to. It's one that I've been slowly going through and honestly feel like I've downplayed how much I enjoy it. I've watched the television show except for the last season and I loved it, and then got into the books, which has been a little bit slow going. And that is The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. I read book 3, which is Abons Gate. I loved the first 2 books. Honestly, I really enjoyed them. I feel like I don't talk about them enough. I have a review here on the channel for the very first book, and then I think I talked about book 2 in a wrap up or on a live stream or something like this. But I really did enjoy the first 2 books and just have not come back to The Expanse for some reason. I see a lot of discourse, at least in our little niche, of how The Expanse is, you know, maybe just a bit overrated, or it's a popcorn read. It's not as cool or as worthy as some of that really hard sci-fi. It doesn't get all the science right all the time. And I think maybe possibly I've let that affect me getting back to the series. Plus, I'd already watched the TV show, so I felt like I knew what was coming. But the fact of the matter is, I don't care if it's not super hard sci-fi. I don't care if it's not a perfect series. What it is damn entertaining. And the third book was no exception to that. Abons Gate is probably my least favorite of the first 3, but this is still a book that I am positive on for sure. I'm going to give it the label positive. I'm not going to go up to very positive or overwhelmingly positive, but it was a solid entry and got me even more excited for book 4. In a lot of ways, this felt like moving pieces to get to the next era almost in The Expanse. And because I watch TV show, I have a little bit of an idea where it's going, but not exactly, which is really cool. And I know the books then go past the show. So even if this is considered popcorn sci-fi and it's not perfect, I'm just loving being in The Expanse. The way that the book is written is very much scene to scene, almost in little vignettes, just kind of jumping around. So even though most of the things happening in this book were dialogue, there's some action, but a lot of it's dialogue. The way the scenes jump and the chapters are almost consistently 10 pages, it just goes by so fast. And also the audiobooks happen to be very good in my opinion. So why didn't I like this as much as the first 2? I would say that the POVs, while I enjoyed all of them, I still enjoyed, especially book 2 POVs a bit more. And a lot of, if not all of this, happens pretty much on ships. And that isn't uncommon for The Expanse, but I felt like I was stuck in a box for a lot of it. That's going to happen in this series. It's going to happen in a lot of sci-fi, especially space operas, but I was missing a little bit of the jumping around, maybe to something that isn't so localized, like ships in one area type deal. But the revelations for the plot and things moving forward, this had the biggest revelations. This had the biggest reveals, and it is only up from here, I feel. So a book that I am positive on for sure, and I can't wait to continue. And I'm not going to wait like a year and a half to try book 4. You Like It Darker by Stephen King, mentioning some new releases. I had no plans of reading this, but when I was doing my reading vlog for the Witchwood Crown, which I'll talk about in a bit, I wanted to pair it with something exciting, something that people maybe would be curious about, and also exciting for myself because I had a little bit of a window. So I fit in this short story collection from Stephen King. And after being a little bit worried about the quality of it, considering that, you know, King is a hit or miss, I have to say that I am very positive on You Like It Darker. I like Stephen King's short fiction, and I think even though some of the crime elements or the crime stories in this short story collection are a bit run-of-the-mill, maybe a bit cliche, he goes back to the well a couple times on like the wrongly accused protagonist. Even with all that, King still does things with the human nature and the psyche and disturbing moments, the silence in between the big moments of dialogue that I think he's the best at. And this is him firing on all cylinders for a large amount of these short stories. The only one that I didn't care for necessarily was Finn. It was okay. It's certainly not terrible, but it's definitely my least favorite in the collection. It was a Scrib D exclusive, I think, back in 2021 and got put into here. But all the stuff that he had written recently, I loved. Rattlesnakes was my favorite, and I think the last 3 stories of the collection really send it out with a bang and leave you feeling positive at the end. At least it did for me, and that goes a long way of ending strong. So this collection was excellent. I highly suggest that you check it out. And if you've never read Stephen King, there's other Stephen King experts. I'm not one of them, but I think that this would be a pretty solid place to start because it shows off a lot of his strengths, and some of his weaknesses are not here at all, which is great because he does have them. So you like it darker. Great time with the reading vlog with it as well. And I definitely recommend it if you're trying to read some more Stephen King or you want to get an intro to him. Let's talk about a reread real quick. I have been trying to reread Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson for since I finished the series really. And I've read the first 100 to 200 pages multiple times. And for some reason, I just always kind of put it down because I know I want to read other things. I've already done this before. But there was something in the air this month where I just wanted to be back in the Malazan world. So I finally finished my reread of Gardens of the Moon. And I have to tell you, Malazan does not require a reread to get something out of it and to enjoy the whole story and to understanding it. But you understand a lot more on reread. And the scope of this book 1 is absolutely preposterous. It is so much more than I remember the Rooftop Assassins. I remember the Siege of Pale, which is epic. I remember Animander Rake's intro, but I also forgot just how much stuff Steven Erikson flat out tells you, not hidden, not disguised, but letting you know there was a war for 300,000 years ago that some of those chains still grasp those people today on the 2 sides, and how things are boiling over, and the year of the tusk, all these things. There's so many things in the series that are actually just flat out told to you, and you would be amazed at just how much he put into this novel. Also, there's 4 or 5 dragons. Totally forgot that happened. And I don't consider any of these spoilers. If anything, I would love to motivate you to, one, either try it again if you have in the past and liked it or disliked. I would just love you to try it again. Or if you're considering reading Malazan. I know we talk a lot about themes and this and that, but the epicness and the fantasy elements of this are absolutely outstanding, and a great duel. I mean, just a lot of stuff in this book that I had forgotten. I still to this day feel like the ending, while having amazing moments, is a little bit muddied for me in some ways, but overall I enjoyed this way more than I did the first time through. I'm actually going to give it the nut button on a reread, and it makes me want to continue reading into Malazan. Will I? I don't know. I have to see. I have a lot of goals and other stuff that I haven't read at all before. But for me to do a reread outside of A Song of Ice and Fire, very, very rare. But I'm thrilled that I did it. Kicking it to another fantasy series that I read book 1 of, but this is for the first time, and it's actually a sequel trilogy, and that's The Witchwood Crown by Tad the Chad Williams, one of my favorite authors. I've had an interview with Tad here on the channel. Hope to have more in the future with his last book coming out in The Last King of Ostenar, which is why I'm starting these sequels now. Witchwood Crown is a return to one of the greatest fantasy worlds ever written, with so many different cultures and voices, languages, and just sheer imagination that to me is almost unrivaled. I think epic fantasy is still around. I think that it is a niche, as it always mostly has been. And I think when you look at who's doing it to the highest level possible, you have to include Tad Williams on that list, just for the sheer staying power that he's had. This Ostenard, as a whole, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn into these sequels, 4 decades almost, and is one of the more just profound series I can think of that has influenced so many people. And what we get in Witchwood Crown is Tad Williams taking all of that goodwill he earned in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn and building upon it and turning it up a little bit. And I think the pacing is a bit better than Dragonbone Chair, even though I love Dragonbone Chair's ending. So that's a tough ending to beat. But overall, this book felt like he was really moving things along, cashing in on some of the nostalgia that we have from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, but introducing new characters and new elements that I found just as quality as the first, if not more. And we will see where it goes. There's a lot of mysteries after book 1 that make you want to jump right into Empire of Grass, which I will be doing in August. I'm going to take a little month off and try to time it with the release of the 4th book, because then I have to read book 3. But The Witchwood Crown is epic fantasy, and I love epic fantasy. I love getting lost in the world. I love going on these journeys. I love trying to puzzle out exactly what these elements mean. And the one thing I always talked about Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is still here, and that's magical items, magical mirrors, magical soul. Anything that you can imagine is probably in here, and it's something that I just really attach myself to. It's a cliche or a trope that I do love. My only concern is that maybe we will just rehash some of the old ground. It'll be a little bit cyclical. Is that the word? You know, I don't want it to be redundant. I don't want us to face the same big old bad just to do it. I have faith in Tad Williams that is not what it's going to be, and that we're not just making a sequel for sequel's sake. I think that we are actually going to see a purpose behind all this, and I'm excited to be along the ride. Without a doubt, this is going to get the nut butting. I am overwhelmingly positive on the Witchwood Crown, and this is something that, hopefully can make my top list. I'm sure the other books are going to be even better. I've heard book 2's better. So there's a mystery that I'm very curious about and a bit confused about, and I need answers, Tad. I need them. This is not a month of common things for me, a very rare reread, a rare DNF that I'm going to talk about, but also a rare nonfiction, and I read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. This came as a recommendation from my friend Jared Henderson. This is free on Audible if you're interested. I ended up buying the binder from Library of America, and what is there to be said? One of the most impactful, important people in American history and the anti-slave movement, Frederick Douglass's account firsthand of slavery and what he had to live through and other people had to live through is absolutely harrowing and haunting. And somehow you feel this sense of power from Frederick Douglass at the end of it all, and his ability to overcome and his ability to succeed and teaching himself how to read and write. So even though this is obviously one of the toughest things I've ever read, it also gives you a sense of hope and certainly compassion as well. This is maybe the most important book I've read, at least as an American, but I think anyone from anywhere could read this and find, very worthy lifelong lessons. And I recommend it greatly to you. It's very short. It's barely over 100 pages, and just one of the most important men ever to live, in my opinion. So Frederick Douglass, Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass is just tremendous, and I highly, highly recommend it. And I will read more of his work. I'm actually very impressed, by the way, because it was written a while ago. I thought his writing was excellent, very evocative, and flowed beautifully, and it felt, it really is a narrative, and the way that he was able to paint those pictures and explain the human emotions behind them and human nature and just how awful of an institution slavery is quite incredible. So highly recommend that to you. I know that that's far and away from what I usually read here on the channel, but I would be selling it short not to say that it's one of the best and most important books I've ever read. Lapvona was the book of the month from my Patreons last month. That was from Amanda, who is also an author named Anya Dillon. I highly suggest you go check her out on Amazon. But Otessa Moshfegh, Lapvona. I've read one other book from this author, and it was My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I loved. I would dare say overwhelmingly positive on that book. So this one had a big shoes to fill, and though it did not quite reach that height, I did enjoy this and came away positive on it. Lapvona is a story about a medieval village that is really worthy because of its dirt and its soil, which I think has a lot of thematic value in the story. And you have rulers up on the hill, the noble class on the hill, and then everyone else in the lowest class possible in the town. And there is no middle class, no middle ground. And this book is absolutely disgusting. This is something that the author goes for, uses vile language, some of just the most disturbing, disgusting imagery that you could ever imagine, like the dirtiest of dirty human nature. I mean, just very animalistic at times. So that is her thing. That's her style. So if you don't like that, you're good. You don't need to try this. But where this book succeeded for me was in the idea that class has so much more to do with just how much money you have and how you live your daily life, but also in how you treat each other, how you overcome obstacles. And most of all in this book, it is tied to your religious beliefs and how you view God, what you give him credit for and what you blame him for. And getting that type of focus from a noble POV to a peasant POV was really, really interesting to me and something that I am interested in. But it's not simple. It's not as simple as you have a low class, no class. These people are bad. These people are good. It's not. It's a lot more messy than that. And the most compelling part of the book is the fact that it also shows the transition from the lowest class to the highest class in a very unorthodox way. And you see that person begin to betray things that they would have held sacred, or just in the manner of which they act, or turn down food. you could do a psychoanalysis of these characters, I mean, who are really over the top. Amanda used the phrase theatrical for this story, and I agree. It is very theatrical. The character is very theatrical. But seeing someone go from one class to the next and how that shapes their beliefs and their interactions with other humans and the deeds they have done and how they process that journey, very, very compelling stuff. So if you're someone who is interested in the themes of class and religion and how those things affect each other, I think that you'll get a lot out of this book. Entertainment value-wise, I can see a lot of people thinking that this is just kind of like muddled and boring. I did not feel that way. And in fact, I actually think some of the plot twists in this were really good. They were so out of left field at one point that I'm like, I wonder if I reread this, if I would think this is actually a good twist. But right now, I am surprised. And the ending of it really left me thinking, I want to reread this book. Because even though it is not as good, in my opinion, as My Year in Rest and Relaxation, I still think that there's more to dig into here, that I need to spend more time with it. So eventually down the road, on one of my rare rereads, maybe this will make the list. It's not going to be a hit for all of you, but it certainly can be something for someone who is interested in that classism/religious context. So I recommend it to those people, but it's a hard one because it is absolutely grotesque and explicit. But I am positive on this book. Okay, let's talk about the DNF. The DNF is a book that I was planning on reading with my friend Mitch, and that was Starfish by Peter Watts, book 1 in the Rifters trilogy. I love Blindside by Peter Watts. It's literally one of the most thought-provoking books I've ever read. And definitely one of the most unique books ever that I've ever had the experience of reading. Peter Watts himself, a very fascinating guy who I find to be chaotically awesome in interviews. I think he's brilliant. He even has some references in the back of his books, which, you know, it's very opposite end of the spectrum as we talked about The Expanse, of being a little bit harder sci-fi. The Rifters trilogy, or this book 1, Starfish, is really all about, instead of a deep space adventure, we have a deep sea adventure. We're going down into the sea or the ocean, down towards the vents, and we are harnessing energy, and society is putting people who have been through humanity's worst experiences possible because they're hardened and they can handle it, which I think is a bit of a flimsy idea, but maybe not. And you're putting them down there and they're, you know, kind of contained and isolated, and it's creepy, and the atmosphere is insanely good. His descriptions of emotion and the setting and the eeriness of it all is A+ stuff. I like Peter Watts's writing, but the idea that determinism plays a role in the story is obvious from the get-go, I think, at least. And I think determinism's definitely something that I'm interested in reading about, and stories framed with that as like the core belief in it. You know, I'm not a hard determinist. I'm also not a hard free will. I'm open-minded. I sense that depending on the day, I could answer either way. So that's not important, really. But whenever you are inspecting determinism, I think that there's like a leash that you're hoping the readers will be able to grab to extend themselves to seeing the other side of things, right? And that is an argument that like Robert Sapolsky has made, that determinism would lead to more empathy because people can't help it or whatever. But I just don't think Peter Watts did a very nice job of setting up the characters that we have that are extremely troubling to read about. One is someone who has been abused and is addicted to that abuse. And then there's another person who is let's just say a terrible person that hurts people who can't defend themselves. And I just did not feel, and I felt like there was supposed to be sympathy for this person because they can't help it or something. And it just was, it did not work for me. It did not land, and I wasn't willing to extend myself to that POV at all. I've read other works that have really like troubling or problematic POVs that I'm willing to kind of sit in their head and wrestle with these things. But I just didn't think it was set up very well. It was kind of very matter of fact. Now, with that said, I DNF'd this very, very early. I think there's a lot of potential in this book. And my friend Mitch, who I don't think finished it either, actually told me a twist that happens later, which makes me think I may have DNF'd this a little bit early. So, with that said, I am not going to donate the book. I'm not going to sell it. I'm actually going to wait and maybe try to give it another shot because I love Blindside so very much. But at this time, it was not anywhere near the mindset I want to be in to read these type of POVs. And I also just did not feel like it was set up terribly well. And I was having even trouble deciphering a couple of the characters from each other, like different crewmates that kind of just thrown in there. Didn't feel like they had their own distinct voices, which kind of bothered me as well. But this is not an awful book. I don't think that it's so poorly written I couldn't stand to read it. It was just very conflicting for me and not the right time. So I DNF'd it, rare DNF for me. but I wanted to mention it because I know I talked about wanting to read it this month on my last wrap-up. So there you have it. It's maybe my first or second DNF this year, I think. But maybe I will try it again in the future. And now it's time for the Patreon pick of the month. I'm excited. You're excited. I'm wearing a Tony Soprano knockoff polo. Absolutely. Let's see what my patrons have in store for me for the month of July 2024. All right. And the winner for July is... grab a good one here. Number 84, which is Curran's pick, and that is Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey, I believe. I'll double check the name. Oh my. So Kushiel's Dart is a book that I have wanted to read for a very, very long time. I've heard it's beautifully written. I've heard it's pretty dense and just one of the more underrated epic fantasy series. I don't know if you call it epic fantasy, but it's a long fantasy series. I know there is some romance in it and some BDSM or something. Like, that's all I ever hear about this book. But this is actually one that's been sitting on my bookshelf downstairs, and I have been waiting. So Curran, number 84, Kushiel's Dart. I'm excited. So what else am I going to be reading? So I got some post-apocalyptic stuff. I might do the vlog for that. And one of them is a fantasy series that was recommended to me by Library Ladder, which is called Lamentation by Ken Scholes. And it's a 4-book series. The books are relatively short, and it feels very Dying Earth-esque with like maybe a tad bit of like Elder Scrolls, Dwarven technology. I don't know. It's very strange. I'll probably talk about it more on a reading vlog. I'll be reading Kushiel's Dart. And then who knows? I have no idea what else I will be reading. It's going to be a bit of a free month until I get to that required next Tad Williams read in August. So I plan on having some fun. I don't know if I'll throw in some literary fiction or not. Possible. But we will have to see. Kushiel's Dart is not a short book, and it's definitely, from what I understand, dense. So that might take me a good amount of the month, but we will see. What are you reading in July? What did you read in June? Let me know down in the comments below. Are you going to read Kushiel's Dart with me in July? I have a feeling it's going to be like one other person, but hey, maybe it'll be an absolute heater and I can get more people to read it. Have you started Ostenard by Tad Williams? If not, you should. But sincerely, thank you so much for being here. If you like this video, you can hit like. If you dislike it, you can hit dislike. If you loved it, think about subscribing. There is a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. I'd like to give a big shout out to all my patrons, especially my Kingsguard, which include Bridger, Zan, Adam K, Emil, Jonathan J, Prithvi, Eric B, Chadia, Taylor D, Matthias D, Carlos, Yolanda, John C, John, Garrick, Evie, Henrik, Benjamin C, Sebastian M, Frank C, C. Scott, Jacob Wade, Darren, Jobot, Terrence F, Michael B, Lauren M, Nicholas E, Kai C, Kev, Ryan, Shad, Amanda V, Ikaika, RJ, Stuart C, Oscar A, Derry, Tanner, Stromboli Bones, Damon H, Kuiper, Adam, Caitlin S, Curran G, Slay, Mark J, Mike J, Darnell H, Sabo Archipelago, which I think someone put that name because I know I can't say that word, and Social Teas. Thank you all so very much. You are the best.